When you're getting ready to start to paint, you need to put some water onto your dried paints so that they'll be ready to use. So before I actually start my drawing, I will put water on each of the colors, especially the ones I know I'm going to use. And what I used to do was dip it in the water and then squeeze out a few drops onto each. I don't know if you can see that, onto each of the colors, but that didn't work very well and it was time consuming. And what I realized all I needed to do was to get an eyedropper, pick up some clean water, put a few drops on each of the colors with the eyedropper, so that by the time I'm ready to paint, another 10 or 15 minutes, the paint is good and wet and I can start picking up my color right away. Another way you can do that is to use a spray bottle and just simply spray the whole area of color. I don't like to do that. It's not as precise, and when you get water over the whole palette, the colors could start to run into each other on the palette. If you do that, you need to use a very fine mist sprayer. This was a perfume sprayer, so it creates a very fine mist. If you use like a water bottle that's made for spraying plants or something, you're going to get big drops of water and it's going to be sloppier. Using a spray bottle like this is also a way to extend the wetness of a painting. If you're working on an area you want to keep it wet for a while and it's drying out quickly, if you have a fine mist sprayer, you can spray it kind of above, maybe 12 inches or 6 inches above the area you want to paint, especially if it's not windy. Spray that and the mist will settle on the paint and keep it wet a little while longer. Again, if you're using like a plant spray bottle that puts big drops of water down, it's going to make those little blooms all over your painting from all those droplets. So be very careful if you're using a spray bottle. Practice it, test it out, and make sure you have the right equipment before you do it on a real painting that you've spent a lot of time on. Okay, so the difference between tube watercolor paints and dry half pan cakes. These are called half pans, these sizes of dry watercolors. And as I said, they come in the kit. This is a travel kit with a thumb hole, so you can use this while you're outside painting, and you could mix your paints on this palette and put it on your painting that way. These are tubes of watercolors. The difference is that you can buy individual tubes of watercolors, just the colors you want, as opposed to buying a pre-selected selection of colors like this that you have no control over other than choosing which set to buy. At the beginning, for beginners, I would say don't spend money on tubes of watercolors because it could run up to quite a bit of money, and if you're not sure that you even want to continue with watercolor, whether you like it enough to continue or not, it's best to buy some middle grade quality brushes. Don't buy the sets of brushes where you can get like 30 brushes for $6, because they're going to be really crappy brushes. Hairs are going to come out of them while you're painting. The brush is not going to hold its shape. It's going to get frayed and it would be useless. Buy sort of middle grade brushes. Don't spend maybe more than $6 or $7 on a brush if you can help it. And since you only need a few basic brushes to start with, that's a good way to start. Pick the watercolor set that appeals to you. Again, you don't need more than 12 or 15 colors to start with. That'll help teach you about mixing colors as well if you don't have like every color in the rainbow. If you will find that you use certain colors a lot more than you use other colors. So those colors in the palette are going to empty out and run out sooner. When that particular color runs way down and you know you like using that color, then you can go to an art supply store and buy a tube of that particular color, and you can refill that spot in the pan, let it dry overnight, and then you've got that color again, plus you've got some more in the tube. This is certainly going to be more than you could fill in with one filling, and you've got more of that color to use in the future. The advantage to tube colors, however, is for doing big washes and using a lot of color because they're already wet. It's also good to get an extra mixing palette to use. Some come as a round sort of palette with little pools around the outside edge for mixing good amounts of paint. I like this one because it has several large sections and small sections for mixing a large amount of paint that I could mix and store in there and use as I'm painting. It gives me more room than mixing on this little palette, a little palette here. So if you're going to do a large wash, I'm going to put some cerulean blue down here right out of the tube, and you'll see the difference. To mix this much cerulean blue from this dry palette, I would have to keep dipping the brush, putting more water, dipping the brush, squeezing it out, putting more water, and do that for quite a while to get enough of the blue that I can get quickly from the tube color here. If I were going to do a sky from this, as I said, the first thing I do is use my larger brush, and you want to wet that whole area that you want to do the sky wash in. Wet the whole thing first. Every time I dip my brush in the water before I paint, I usually touch it quickly to my paint rag. You can also use a sponge if you don't want to use a paint rag. Dip it to that quickly so that I get any excess water off. And then this is somewhat drier than I expected. Sometimes the tube colors after a few years will dry up in the tube. And then you put this over the area that you wet. And as you pull it down, most of the paint will go on at the beginning, and it will slowly dilute the paint as you brush it down over the area, and then you will have a nice graded wash. Again, I'm rinsing my brushes in this water, and I'm going to use this water now to paint with because this net was now contaminated with the blue color. If I use brown or red or green, in addition to the blue, this water is going to start getting muddy, and I don't want to use that muddy water to put color on my paper. I want to use clean water. So it's good to always have 2 containers of water that you can see. As soon as your water starts to get dirty, change it out and put clean water in. If you think in terms of putting your watercolor down, in terms of having hard edges and having diffuse edges, that's one of the approaches I use when I'm painting. And a technique I like to use for that is to have 2 brushes, one in each hand. They're both damp. I'm right-handed, so I use my right hand brush to put the color down, and I've quickly just drawn some leaf shapes here. And if I'm going to put some of the color down that I like, first always test it on your test paper, because if you're halfway through your painting and you put the wrong color on your paint, you've kind of ruined it because you can't really paint over it like you can with opaque watercolor. So always use your test paint, your test paper, put the color down, and I put that in there. I let that dry while I'm working on another area. Then I can go through and I can get some more of that paint. This time I want some more intense green for the shadow area under here. And I put that in, but this time I want a diffuse edge on that shadow, so I use my clean damp brush, and quickly, before the paint even starts to dry, rush it, bring it along the edge to diffuse that color. Let's try it again. If you put down your dark color and use a wet, clean brush to pull that color away. So now I have clean, hard edge here, and I have a diffuse edge along the bottom. And now this paint is dry, so I can go in with a darker green if I want. Paint that dark edge, and again, soften that edge. So I have a clean, hard edge and a diffuse edge on that same shape of paint. Go to the next color. And for this, I'm going to use my small mop. And some yellow to mix with the green, so I get a light yellow, green. And again, I can do the same thing. If you find you put too much paint down, if you quickly use a clean brush, I like to rotate the brush. You can pull some of that paint right off of the paper. You have to wipe it each time in between. You need to do it immediately, because if you wait until it's half dry, you start to get a bloom. But there's a way to sort of pull out those colors that you put down too much color. In the last two videos, I show you some of my own work so you can see some of the nice effects you can get with watercolors and some of the things to avoid when using watercolors.